Chucky? Chucky, are you okay? Am I okay?
Picture this. It's a Saturday morning. Your cereal is getting soggy, and you're half awake in front of the TV. You're expecting pratfalls and catchphrases, and instead, the cartoon starts talking about drugs, racism, grief, or climate change. Before primetime turned very special episodes into a ratings hook, a lot of kids' first lessons about adult problems came from the shows we thought were just background noise for breakfast. That's what we're diving into today. The cartoons that tackled real-world issues long before most live-action family sitcoms were willing to go there, week after week. These shows didn't always get it perfect, but they tried to translate some of the hardest topics in grown-up life into stories a kid could understand, sometimes more honestly than the serious shows our parents were watching at 8 p.m. So in this video, we're counting down 10 times cartoons stepped up and dealt with the tough stuff. Everything from inner-city poverty to addiction, prejudice, grief, and mental health. Some of these you'll remember vividly. Others might jog a memory you didn't even realize came from a cartoon. If you love this kind of TV deep dive, nostalgic shows with surprisingly heavy ideas baked in, hit that like button, subscribe to Throwback Network, and let me know in the comments which cartoon lesson stuck with you the most. Now, let's get into it. 10. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, Saturday morning in the real world. Before primetime got comfortable with very special episodes, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was basically built out of them. You'd tune in expecting goofy adventures in a junkyard clubhouse, and suddenly the show is talking about gang violence, drugs, or a kid being abused at home. The setup was always deceptively simple. The gang would bump into a problem in the neighborhood. Maybe a new friend is stealing, or someone's older brother is mixed up in something dangerous. At first it plays like any other cartoon conflict, until you realize they're dealing with some very real consequences. A kid goes missing. Somebody gets hurt. Adults fail the children they're supposed to protect. What made it hit so hard is that the show refused to pretend those realities didn't exist. The backgrounds weren't shiny suburbs. They were cracked sidewalks, rundown buildings, and crowded apartments. The characters had money problems. They lived with racism and limited opportunities. And at the end, you'd get that little classroom-style recap, spelling out exactly what the episode was trying to teach. For a lot of kids, this was the first time TV admitted that the world outside their door could be unfair and dangerous, and that you still had choices to make inside it. While most primetime family comedies were still worried about whether a joke would make adults uncomfortable, Fat Albert was quietly teaching children how to recognize abuse, resist peer pressure, and look out for each other. It wasn't subtle, but it was sincere, and it brought adult issues straight into Saturday morning long before most grown-up shows dared. 9. G.I. Joe, a real American hero. Knowing is half the battle. On the surface, G.I. Joe looks like the last place you'd find serious life lessons. It's a toy commercial with lasers, parachutes, and villains who shout their name while escaping. But if you grew up with it, you know exactly where this is going. Those end-of-episode PSAs, and the surprisingly intense anti-drug stories baked into all that action. You'd watch an episode where Cobra is trying to blow something up with a doomsday device, and then suddenly the story gets personal. A teenage character falls in with the wrong crowd. Somebody takes energy pills that are obviously drugs. A soldier's younger relative starts messing with something that could kill him. The battles stop being just about tanks and jets and become about personal choices. And then, of course, there are those iconic PSAs. A kid is about to jump into a lake during a storm or talk to strangers in a creepy van, and a Joe appears out of nowhere, like a moral guardian. Don't do that. Here's why. It's cheesy, but it's also very direct. When they did the full-blown anti-drug storyline, the tone shifts hard. A character's addiction nearly kills him. The show literally flashes drugs kill on screen. That is not subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. Meanwhile, Primetime sitcoms were treating drugs like a once-a-season stunt. One episode about a joint in a locker, and then back to laugh tracks. G.I. Joe was hammering home safety, consequences, and personal responsibility every single day after school. Behind the explosions and catchphrases, it was trying to give kids language for danger and a script for saying no long before the adults in prime time worked up the nerve. 8. Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, the animated intervention. If you were a kid in 1990, Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue probably felt like a fever dream. You're sitting there, and suddenly every character you've ever seen on Saturday mornings is in one special. The Muppet Babies, Garfield, the Smurfs, Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Looney Tunes crew. And what are they doing? Staging a full-on intervention for a teenager who's using drugs. The story centers on Michael, an older brother slipping into marijuana and petty crime. He's stealing from his little sister, lying to his parents, and getting pulled toward harder substances by this animated smoke creature. That literal cloud of peer pressure whispering in his ear. It's not subtle, but it wasn't meant to be. The entire thing exists to scare kids straight. What makes it wild is how official it feels. It was simulcast across multiple networks. It opens with a message from the President and First Lady. It pulls characters from rival studios into one united front. Bugs Bunny and the Muppet Babies teaming up against weed. You didn't have to decode metaphors. The cartoon heroes are telling you, very plainly, don't do drugs. Talk to your parents. This can ruin your life. Primetime shows did their drugs are bad arcs too, but they often wrapped them in jokes or half measures. This special just looked kids right in the face, using the characters they trusted, and said, here's what addiction looks like. Here's how it sinks its claws into you. Don't go down this road. It was heavy-handed, sure, but for a generation of kids, the first time the word addiction felt real wasn't on a police drama. It was when their favorite cartoon characters staged an intervention on a Tuesday night. 7. Captain Planet and the Planeteers, eco-anxiety for kids. If you grew up humming Captain Planet, he's our hero, you probably didn't realize just how dark that show actually was. On paper, it's colorful environmental superhero fare. 5 kids with magic rings call forth a blue guy with green hair to stop pollution. In practice, it's a crash course in environmental collapse, corporate greed, and global responsibility. Episodes didn't tiptoe around the stakes. You'd see oceans clogged with oil, rainforests mowed down, entire communities poisoned by toxic waste. Villains weren't just cackling weirdos. They were stand-ins for real-world problems. Unchecked corporations, corrupt officials, people who knew better and didn't care. The show was constantly shouting a message modern news cycles still wrestle with: this damage is human-made, and it's preventable. For a kid, that's intense. One week you're watching cartoon pirates. The next, you're learning about ozone depletion, endangered species, and the idea that the poorest people suffer the most when the environment is destroyed. The show even puts some of that guilt back on the viewer. Almost every episode ended with a Planeteer alert, telling you what you could do in your own life. Recycle, conserve water, write to your leaders. Meanwhile, primetime TV was only occasionally dabbling in environmental storylines, maybe a special episode about littering, or a sitcom family trying to go green for laughs. Captain Planet made environmental disaster its entire narrative engine. It told kids bluntly that grown-ups had messed up the planet and that the next generation was going to have to do better. It might have been packaged with catchy theme music and one-liners, but the underlying message was as adult as it gets. The world is fragile, and what we do now actually matters. 6. X-Men, the animated series, Prejudice in spandex. On the surface, X-Men, the animated series, is about superheroes in bright costumes blasting energy beams at each other. But if you look back at it as an adult, you realize This Saturday morning cartoon was your first lesson in bigotry, civil rights, and the politics of fear. The core idea is simple and devastating. Mutants are born different, and the world hates and fears them for it. That alone is already a pretty clear metaphor, but the show pushes it further. You see politicians campaigning on anti-mutant hysteria. You see protesters with signs. You see entire governments trying to track, register, and imprison people purely for what they are. Words like cure and control get thrown around in ways that feel uncomfortably familiar. Some of the most memorable storylines hit like a brick once you're old enough to understand them. There's Genosha, the island that promises to be a mutant paradise and turns out to be a slave state built on lies. There are concentration camp visuals, collars that suppress abilities, and mass roundups. You don't need a history degree to feel what that's meant to evoke. Meanwhile, the personal stories are about identity and internal conflict. Characters wrestle with hiding who they are, disappointing their families, or turning their backs on their own kind to survive. As a kid, you just knew it felt heavy. As an adult, you see reflections of racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, every form of "you don't belong here." Primetime shows were starting to brush against some of those topics in the 90s, but often with a wink or a very special episode label. X-Men baked them into its DNA. Between toy commercials and cereal ads, it was quietly teaching kids about systemic prejudice, resistance, and the cost of hate, using mutants to say what network TV wasn't ready to say out loud. 5. Batman, the animated series, crime, trauma, and the line in the sand. Batman, the animated series didn't look like a kid's cartoon, and it didn't act like one either. From the opening credits, with that orchestral score and the shadowy city skyline, it felt closer to a noir film than anything airing next to it. And hidden inside its 22-minute episodes were stories about crime, corruption, and psychological damage that would have fit just fine on a primetime drama. Batman himself is basically walking trauma. The show never stops reminding you that this crusade started with a child watching his parents die. But it goes beyond his origin. Episode after episode, it asks hard questions. Where does justice end and vengeance begin? How much of Gotham's crime is caused by systemic rot, not just colorful villains? The Rogues Gallery is where the adult issues really shine through. Two-Face struggles with mental illness and identity. Mr. Freeze is driven by grief and corporate exploitation that leaves his wife literally frozen in time. There's an episode where an aging mob boss is forced to confront the fact that his own son is battling addiction, and he's been too wrapped up in the underworld to see it. The show also lets the bad ending stand. Not everyone gets cured or redeemed. Some criminals are tragic, not evil, and the system that chews them up doesn't magically get fixed by the end credits. For a kid who was used to neat resolutions, that ambiguity hits hard. At a time when live-action superhero stories were still mostly campy or low budget, this weekday cartoon was quietly telling complex crime stories with real emotional stakes. Before primetime cop shows and prestige dramas tried to unpack broken systems and anti-heroes, Batman, the animated series, was doing it after school, lit by the flicker of a tube TV. 4. Gargoyles, hate, fear, and the cost of violence. If Disney Afternoon was supposed to be light and breezy, Gargoyles clearly didn't get the memo. The very first episodes show an entire clan of gargoyles nearly wiped out in a brutal betrayal. That's genocide as your opening act, on a weekday afternoon, between commercials for fruit snacks. The premise is high concept. Medieval stone guardians are cursed, sleep for 1,000 years, and wake up in modern New York City. But the emotions are painfully grounded. The surviving gargoyles are traumatized refugees in a world that doesn't want them. Humans fear them, attack them, exploit them. Every time they try to help, someone with a camera or a gun is ready to turn them into monsters again. The show leans hard into themes of racism and otherness. The Gargoyles stand in for any group that's been persecuted, misunderstood, or demonized. There are protests, hate mobs, and quiet, awful moments where characters start to believe the ugly things people say about them. And it doesn't stop there. One of the most shocking storylines involves a character being accidentally shot with a gun that was never meant to go off, and the episode actually deals with the aftermath. Guilt, responsibility, fear of weapons in the home. Heavy stuff for a block usually reserved for slapstick. What's wild is that Disney let it be serialized and serious. Actions have consequences that ripple across the season. Betrayals aren't forgotten. Relationships are complicated and messy. Meanwhile, plenty of primetime shows at the time were still hitting the reset button every week, so nothing felt too uncomfortable. Gargoyles respected kids enough to show them that fear and hate don't come out of nowhere, and that violence, even accidental, leaves scars. It wasn't just a monster show. It was a story about what happens when a society decides some people are less than human, and what it takes to fight back against that idea. 3. Rugrats, Grief Through a Child's Eyes. For most of its run, Rugrats is chaos in a playpen. Babies escaping their cribs, mishearing adult words, turning the backyard into a jungle adventure. But then comes an episode like Mother's Day, and suddenly this squiggly little cartoon drops you into one of the heaviest emotions a kid can feel: missing a parent you barely remember. Chucky Finster is the heart of this story. While the other kids make macaroni art and construction paper presents, he's just lost. Everyone else has a mom. He doesn't. The show never leans on a big exposition dump. It lets you feel his confusion, his longing, and the quiet ache that something important is missing from his life. The payoff is brutal and beautiful. His dad, Chaz, finally opens up. Through a poem and a box of cherished items, we learn that Chucky's mom died when he was very young. There's no magic fix. No, she's actually alive twist. Just a dad and a son talking, as best they can, about someone they both loved and lost. As a kid, you might not have known why your chest felt tight watching it. As an adult, you realize this was one of the first times a TV show talked honestly about death, in a way that didn't involve a very special guest star or a car accident off screen. Primetime sitcoms often treated dead parents as backstory, a one-line explanation at most. Rugrats made an entire episode about sitting with that grief, and it doesn't end in despair. The episode gently reframes Mother's Day as a time to celebrate the love they still have and the memories they share. It's raw, but hopeful. For kids who had lost someone, or who were just starting to realize that parents aren't immortal, this goofy-looking baby cartoon offered a surprisingly tender place to process those feelings. 2. Hey Arnold, the city, the struggle, and the soft heart. If most kids' shows lived in spotless suburbs with two-car garages, Hey Arnold lived in the kind of city where the paint is peeling, the neighbors are loud, and everyone has a story. That alone made it feel more real than a lot of primetime family comedies. But underneath the football-shaped head jokes was a show quietly wrestling with poverty, trauma, and mental health. Arnold himself is this calm center in a chaotic world. He lives in a boarding house run by his grandparents, surrounded by eccentric tenants who, on closer inspection, are just damaged adults trying to get by. There's the lonely guy who can't make friends, the immigrant with a painful past, the man clinging to the glory days that never really were. None of it is labeled, but you can feel depression, anxiety, and regret pulsing through those stories. Then, there are the kids. Helga's home life, played for laughs at first, slowly reveals neglect and emotional abuse. Mr. Hyun's quiet sadness turns out to be rooted in war and the daughter he lost. You get episodes about homelessness, about kids who don't have enough money, about people living with addictions and regrets. The show never pauses for a lecture. It just lets you see these realities through Arnold's unshakable empathy. While Primetime was still selling the fantasy of the perfect nuclear family, with problems solved in 22 neat minutes, Hey Arnold admitted that some problems don't go away. Some situations don't get fixed, but kindness still matters. Listening still matters. Showing up still matters. For kids watching, it was one of the first times a cartoon said, yeah, some families are messy, some grown-ups are broken, some streets aren't safe, but you're not powerless in that world. It took the adult messiness of urban life and translated it into stories that didn't talk down to you. And that might be why its episodes hit even harder when you revisit them now. 1. Arthur, the Gentle Sledgehammer. Topping our list is a show that looked almost impossibly gentle. A round-nosed aardvark in a sunny town, learning life lessons on PBS. But Arthur is proof that you don't need dark lighting or superpowers to tackle adult topics. You just need honesty and a lot of empathy. On the surface, episodes are about school projects, annoying siblings, and playground drama. Dig a little deeper, and you realize what's really going on. The bully episode isn't just bullies are bad. It explores why someone might become a bully, what shame feels like, and how hard it is to change. When the show deals with divorce, it doesn't sugarcoat the confusion. Kids worry they caused it. Parents struggle with how much to share. The new normal is awkward and painful before it starts to feel okay. Over the years, Arthur quietly expanded its range. It addressed illness and disability with a frankness most adult shows still stumble over. Later on, it even stepped into LGBTQ territory, portraying a same-sex marriage in a matter-of-fact, warm way that some stations actually refuse to air. For a lot of kids, that episode was their first time seeing a gay couple presented not as a punchline, not as a very special debate topic, but simply as people in love. Primetime television, even decades in, often treated these subjects as controversial landmines. Arthur treated them as part of life. It trusted children to handle complexity as long as it was presented with kindness. No melodrama, no moral panic. Just characters learning, messing up, apologizing, and growing. That's why it sits at number 1. Because beneath its soft colors and simple animation, Arthur consistently did something incredibly adult. It modeled how to live with other people, even when life gets complicated. And it did it years ahead of many shows aimed at their parents. In the end, that might be the biggest secret of these cartoons. They weren't just for kids at all. While primetime TV was still trying to figure out how to turn drugs, prejudice, grief, and environmental collapse into ratings events, these animated shows were already in our living rooms, quietly shaping how we understood the world. They told us that the city could be rough, but community mattered, that hatred was learned, and it could be unlearned, that addiction and loss weren't moral failures, but human tragedies, that the planet needed protecting, and that every small choice counted. They did it with talking babies, superheroes, eco-warriors, and aardvarks. Because sometimes you can smuggle the truth in under the radar if you paint it in bright colors. So next time someone shrugs off cartoons as kid stuff, remember the lessons you didn't learn from primetime dramas or news specials. You learned them before lunch, with a bowl of cereal in your lap. If one of these shows hit you especially hard growing up, drop it in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the surprisingly serious side of classic TV, make sure you're subscribed, because we've got plenty more where this came from.